construction. Today we're going to focus on, oh, there we go. I can't figure out how to change my slide. There we go. So we're going to look at the terms. What is risk? Terms associated with risk. What are the types of risk? Manage construction risk. Some of the risk response strategies and some discussions and questions. I was just on pause there because I'm trying to get Malcolm Smith to join us, who I know Malcolm for years. Malcolm is a commercial insurance broker who is probably, I think, one of the top people in Canada that really understands Indigenous communities and First Nations insurance. So I'm hoping that he will come on board, because there's usually a whole series of questions he might be able to answer. So because I am not an insurance person, but I do have a certificate in risk management by the insurance industry. But I don't sell insurance. All right. So what is risk? Well, it's different definitions depending on your sector. So one possible term is, I gotta move this up there, is the loss or harm or adverse health effects. If it could be a subject matter of insurance, it could be an insurance applicant. It's a situation, exposure to danger. So for example, the symbol down below, it's a high risk. You see these symbols, and this symbol here is for coercion. So there's some acid. Basically, if you get on your hand, you're going to hurt yourself. It's or be a cause of loss. So generally, risk is a chance or it's a probability that a person can be harmed or experience an adverse health effect. So when we talk in health, for example, there is always a risk. And so one of the big examples which we use and you hear all the time is the risk of developing cancer if you smoke. And usually it will be given us a probabilities that will say, for example, cigarette smokers are 12 times more likely to die of lung cancer than non-smokers, or the number of 100,000 smokers will develop lung cancer. So there's, if you smoke, there's a risk, there's a high risk of cancer, and it gives you that probability, or it gives you the likelihood that you would develop some type of sickness associated with cancer, or the people around you if you smoke, what the impact will be. So risk, from a health side, talks about the adverse effects. So risk refers to the uncertainty that surrounds future events and outcomes. In construction, it's really more specific. A risk is a potential event, either internal or external to a project, that if it occurs, may cause the project to fail or meet one of its objectives. And one of the objectives would be completing on time, meeting the budget on time, making sure the tenants are able to move in on the date identified. Another objective would be meeting your timelines. So risk is always some type of potential event that can impact an outcome. So what I want to do is just look at the following pictures to see how risk would be associated. So in this first picture, we have footings being laid. And so some of the risk would be there's no fencing around that I could see. 2, if it rains, there's a good chance of these walls collapsing. So you don't know, if the person just laid it and the contractor or the cement guys are coming in a little later. So there's always risk associated with here. If you want to add some more, Claude, got some comments on the risk possible?
Yeah, John, I see a piece of rebar sticking up there. To me, that is a potential risk. Usually I like to see a cap on it, usually the rubber cap, if it is a piece of rebar.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. It's so blended well in the red soil. Okay. Another picture. So we have 3 roofers working hard. And so the risk I can see is that there's no safety harnesses on any of the 3. So there's a risk of falling off the roof. Next one I want to look at. Here we have somebody with some good looking calves on his toes, holding an air gun to put a nail on the top of a frame. Again, no safety harnesses on any of the 3 workers. What do you call that board across, Claude?
That board going across is basically those metal. Those are metal roof jacks, and what they do is
Okay.
they put a plank across, sometimes depending on the slope of the roof, to help provide some footing, or we'll say something to basically stand on or balance against as far as doing the roof is concerned.
But they still require safety harnesses, all 3 of them.
Oh, certainly. When I look at this, none of them are meeting, well, Ministry of Labor, certainly off reserve requirements. So they could all be fined, certainly, and certainly there's a risk of potential fall.
Okay. So you have to look at this to see what the picture is. So you can see that there's a window here, and the owner of this home afterwards put this extension over his garage. I say it might be about maybe 3-4 feet to give him some extra protection over his garage. And the risk here is I don't think he did this with a permit. I doubt he would get a permit to do this because you can't block a window. Correct me if I'm wrong, Claude.
Yeah, it's kind of not sure if it's a code contravention, but certainly it brings into question even looking at the snow on the roof. It's certainly going to how does it fit into that whole the whole roof fit into that whole window well, we'll call it. So certainly it raises a lot of questions of probably good intent. I guess I would classify it as poor design.
Well, if that window is open, at least you can get the snow rake on it easier.
That's true.
All right. So here it's pretty obviously what this risk is. It was a construction site that got torched with fire, and it's a very high risk associated with construction and fire, and basically looks like very little is recoverable. Next picture, we have a house that's been boarded up, and there's a couple of risks here. One would be a financial risk, that if this is being rented, obviously you're not getting any rent from it. There's no occupants. Then there's got the risk of being damaged. Another risk here is of weather. Looks like they dug for a foundation, and they hit water either through rain or ground seepage up. But obviously there's a risk here. Here we have a wood source fire that was installed and looks like it's operating, and it has a number of risks. It's not actually installed properly. It's supposed to be on some type of metal or slab. It's on actually vinyl floor. My understanding behind, there's supposed to be a cement board behind that or something to deflect the heat. This actually reminded me of a story of, I think it was in Saskatchewan, one of the fires where a family, several members were died. And what happened was they had a heat source installed, and the person left it on the, it comes on a small pellet. So rather than take it off the pellet, he kept it on the pellet, and the pellet eventually dried out and caught fire, and it burnt the house down. And what was evident from the inquest or the investigation was that nobody inspected the install after it was put in. Here's another picture relating to a heat source that was installed. So we can see the occupant took out a window, put the pipe on the outside, deflecting, rather than going straight up, it just reflects, on each side. You can see all the smoke damage at the top. If you're standing here, if the wind's blowing here, there's a good chance you're going to be taken in or that door is open, the smoke can go back in. Obviously, there's kids playing here, so this is a hot pipe, and so they may burn themselves. So there's a number of risks associated with this heat source and the way it was installed. And again, probably no inspection, because I don't think that would pass any inspection. So basically, when we look at risk, there's two terms that generally comes up all the time. One of the terms is called, what is a peril? And generally a peril, when you're talking to risk, it's the event that will give rise to some loss. So for example, flooding, explosion, fire, sort of the act of God scenarios falls on those peril situations. And the other big term that we always hear within risk is a hazard. And so factors which may influence the outcome of a loss. So for example, a fall, struck by an object. Again, those pictures, we saw a couple hazards. The foundation could collapse, the hazard of the roofers falling off the roof, the hazards of the fire, the heat source not being installed properly. So there's always a number of hazards when you look at from a risk perspective. So what I want to do is, before I go to the definition, the other point I want to make here is where the term risk came from. So it goes back to the Babylon Code of Law. And some of the earlier risk construction was, for example, if a engineer was building your house and the house falls and you're killed, and the engineer is actually then killed for the damage caused to the person or to the home. If some person is building your home and it collapses, then he's responsible for all the goods in the home, has to replace them. Where risk insurance came originally, it actually came from a fellow who ran a coffee shop called Edward Lloyd. He ran a coffee shop, and at this coffee shop, he was also involved in specialized in information about shipping. And it was back in 1730 when Edward Lloyd started to provide some form of insurance for shipping back at the time. And what happened, the word risk is actually an Italian word, which means, cause to damage. And usually at the time, everything was done through boats, and boats at the time had a high chance of being damaged back in the Roman time. So they had earlier signs of risks back in the times of the Roman to offset some of their marine costs. So this is where risk of the concept really came from, and it's worked its way into a number of, insurance and construction and life, and so there's a number of various types of insurances. So I want to focus on the 5 types of construction risk. So the first one is a safety risk, and this gets to any construction site where risk or hazards that can lead to the workers' accidents. And again, there's a number of examples, working from heights, fall, trips or slips, collapse, trenches, and arm vibration syndrome. So people who get basically tennis elbow or construction elbow from working. One of the issues in Indigenous communities is workers' compensation, and how workers' compensation applies or does not apply to many construction activities, either new or renovations in First Nations. So my understanding is, in many cases, workers' compensation is not applicable. Financial risk. This is really impacts your cash flow, problems with the economy, unexpected cost increases, competition with other firms. And we see that happening right now under COVID, and the substantial increase in wood cost, increase in financial risk. I remember seeing one community, their cost to build a number of homes increased by $700,000. There's also the question of financial defaults of the contractors. In some cases, you pay them in advance and you don't see him again, or you pay him for the final and he doesn't come back and make the final repairs. So it's all the financial risk associated with a building and cash flow. The third risk is the legal risk. And this is potential dispute between the contractor and the clients, or in this case, the First Nations communities. And legal risk also includes a number of other activities. So we have, for example, the building codes and rules and regulations relating to standards. We have legal is negligence to installing, unsafe equipment. We know of many examples where, First Nations becomes the dumping ground for, products that aren't tested. Again, the Chinese drywall situation, or heat exchangers and furnaces that were basically ruled as being unsafe, but they're being installed in First Nation communities. One of the big challenges under legal risk is the reputation for the community and for the contractors. And legal risk also results in fraud, theft, and corruption. So if you have, money for a project and the money disappears, then you're into a legal risk of your construction project. And, how are you going to fund it? Or if there's questions of corruption, then it will impact the completion of the project, such as funds not being paid out to the fullest amount, or banks holding back monies. Another type of construction risk is project risk, and this is really probably the bigger issue that everybody will run up against. This involves basically poor management of the resources. You have a miscalculation of time. You don't have any proper policies. You don't have procurement policies on how you hired your contractors. A contractor got hired, but you're not sure how he was hired. There's misunderstandings of project deliverables. You said you're supposed to, have X on the house, and the contractor says, no, I gave you Y. So there's all these project risks. We're also the design side. It would do for now. So they put stuff in there and they say, well, that would do for now, and we'll finish it later. But in fact, it never gets finished. Another big project risk is labor shortage and quality of the contractors. There's no training. One of the big issues that we talk about under our procurement discussions is poor documentation. So for example, how the technical specifications were not clear, the goals in terms of the project were not clearly stated. And again, no or lack of inspections always puts projects at risk. We had a case where people are trying to move the project forward, but they can't get inspections on a certain phase. So that ties up the whole project. So it becomes, project risk becomes one of the larger segments. Environmental risks. This seems to be happening more and more for a lot of communities, on or off. We talk about floods, the fires that causes damage to the site. Sometimes you can't get access. We talk about, landslides and fires. I know in one of the communities I was in, they built a series of homes, and they had major landslides that basically knocked out the footings of the foundation, and they had to move the house. But the insurance, their deductible, I think, was up to $25,000. So they had to think of whether or not to pay the 25. In this case, they just didn't pay the insurance. They just knocked it down and rebuilt it. So the environment risk is becoming more of a major factor for a lot of people. So what I want to focus on is how to manage construction risk. So how to effectively manage risk? You need to develop a risk management plan. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail. There's how to do a risk management plan, but basically it involves, risk identification, risk evaluation, there's a risk response, there's a risk monitoring and control. You can take courses on how to really dig into setting up a risk management plan. But I'm just going to give you the 6 major steps, which I think a lot of us do it anyway through intuition and just through common sense. So it's not that you have to, do this great big roadmap. We do it a lot through a common sense approach. So the first step is to identify the risks. So what's the risk most common to your project? So if you're building in the north, what are the risks associated with those buildings? So is it going to be, weather's going to be a factor, transportation is going to be a factor, staff, workers, are they available? Usually what happens becomes what's unique to your project. So each community may have a unique risk to their areas. Generally in the pre-construction phase, you have time to manage the risk. So you try to identify your risk before the project start. So if you're planning to build in the fall, for example, you're going to have a weather risk compared to, let's say, in the spring. So generally you would meet with your team, you meet with the inspectors, and the rule of thumb would be, all right, what are the top 5 risks or issues we're going to have with this project moving forward? And so by taking that approach, you can start to identify your risks. So the second one is to put a priority on your risk, order of importance, right? What's the potential impact on the project? What's the chance it will materialize or actually happen? What's the probabilities? What's the likelihood of those risks taking place? So once you identify your risk, you say high, medium, or low. You can put some type of order of importance. And if they're a high risk, then theoretically, you would try to address those before your project will start. The third one is determine what's called your risk response strategy. So in essence, how are you going to respond to that risk? How are you going to respond to those hazards that you identified? And under risk response, there's 4 ways that you can respond to these. So one response would be, well, avoid the risk. Don't build the house in the area where it's prone to flooding. Change the scope of the project. Delay the project. Change the project if you had to. So a lot of people, when they, when they're trying to move forward and they see, oh, we're going to have a risk of this construction project, well, think about, can you avoid those risks? So if you're in an area, again, a lot of the communities, an area that's being flooded, well, what are your, what's your risk mitigation going to be? Well, don't build in that area. And if you do, how can we address the flooding before we put in the new homes, for example? The second one, you can transfer the risk. So by transfer to an insurance provider, and you can ask for a higher construction bond. So basically, you transfer the risk by you purchase insurance on the construction, and if there's any delays or issues, you can get insurance to cover those costs. But you can also do it through a construction bond. Through our procurement discussions, we talk about the importance of First Nations asking for construction bonds. And construction bonds, as we recall, is where contractors have to put, substantial amount of bond on their project, and that bond ensures that they complete the project on time and there's no outstanding issues. So you can ask for a higher construction bond and transfer the risk to the construction bonding company. The third one is to mitigate the risk. So keep the risk low. How do we move forward by keeping the risk low? So if you're having a construction project, so a risk mitigation would be, for example, you would build in the summertime versus the winter time. And the fourth one, accept the risk, accept the delays, but manage the risk, saying we have to move this project forward. We're going to accept the risk, but we're going to manage it as we move forward. We're going to try to address all the challenges when we're building these new homes. We're going to accept the risk if we're doing any renovations to these homes, because why? Well, we have no choice, and we need to do it. And so we just suck it up and we just manage the issues we have going forward. So in terms of managing construction risks, there's 4 other areas. There, for example, to execute a risk management plan, involve members from your team. You can create contingency plans and revise them. I just want to raise these points because it gets really into a lot more detail through courses on risk, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time except for mention it. But what I want to talk about is when you're doing the risk, is ranking them, orders of importance are extremely important, and how would you fix those or address those risks when you're moving forward. So basically, don't be scared of risk, understand the risk. Best to know risk and take action to manage them correctly. And I have an article on construction risk, which we can send out to everybody. And I didn't want to go long on this one because I was supposed to have a Malcolm on from, and I don't know, I can't see if he came on.
Malcolm was there. I don't see him at the moment.
Because Malcolm was going to talk about the impact of COVID and let me just see here.
Yeah, I don't currently see him.
Yeah, he was having problems connecting here. So, okay. Well, he said he had a piece that he wrote. I'll try to get that to him. But in our conversation on risk, what's happening because of construction cost on new builds, that many of the First Nation communities are undervaluing their insurance on new builds. So, for example, if you have insurance on a home of, let's say, $300,000, COVID is adding, as we know, anywhere up to 40% cost. And a lot of the communities are not adjusting their policy to take into account the increased cost from COVID. So we've had since then a number of examples where fires have occurred and they did not take into account in the construction process of the additional cost of lumber. And that's becoming a big issue for a lot of the communities because they have to go back and readjust their insurance policies for new builds. And then the other second point that we talked about is that in many of First Nations communities, they need to look at their insurance policies to make sure that the insurance that they're paying for is clearly reflected on their community assets. So, for example, if you have an insurance policy, you have to make sure that it includes, new construction or buildings that are actually even completed. We ran into an example a few weeks ago where there's a fire in a community and they went to make an insurance claim, and I believe it's under like a schedule or schedule A, and under that schedule or schedule, it's supposed to list all your properties that are covered under that policy. So home A, B, C, D, E, and the lot numbers and definitions and some type of description. And in this case, the community did not have a list of any of their assets. So when there was a fire, they went to make a claim and the insurance did not pay out because it was not listed. And they're paying, I think, around $400,000 a year to cover those assets that weren't in the insurance policy. So the insurance, I believe, last I heard, was not budging. I was not willing to pay. So those are, some of the challenges associated with risk and constructions and existing insurance policies. So I'm going to try to open up the chat. Again, I can't see any chat stuff, Claude.
No, I don't see any questions posted at the current time.
Nope, but I get a lot of emails here. Let me see here. Let's see. All right. Okay.
Well, I could probably make one comment regarding construction because I've had a good amount of experience both in the architectural and certainly on the construction side of things. Basically, working on the architectural side, we always required performance bonds to help protect the owner. And of course, when you really think about it, it doesn't matter who really is the owner. The owner wants some form of protection. As you indicated, will the builder be there if push comes to shove, or if there's disagreements, or if a dispute arises? We don't always know for sure, that someone's going to be there, let's say, to finish the project, because ultimately, like you brought up the issue, with the increases, it might scare off some builders to say, well, I'm midway through the contract, but the owner won't budge and pay me more money because wood has gone up 30% plus. And basically all materials have gone up 30% plus. So it kind of leaves even the builders kind of in a awkward situation of should I walk or should I actually kind of bite the bullet and try and negotiate how to finish this project so everybody's happy. So that's where the performance bond comes in. It's part of what you said was part of going through and attaining something through an insurance broker. Typically, the cost to the contractor would be roughly 10% of the build costs. So if we take that $400,000, it could be in the range of $40,000 of bonding that the contractor would have to put up. Again, the other side of that too is you have to be careful that you don't put out too much money. In other words, pay too much in advance for the work that's done. So you really need someone who has a good understanding of what percentage of work is complete and what percentage of money should be paid out to the builder or contractor or subcontractor. So just a few things to point out there.
And generally, those payments should be based on code compliance inspections on a percentage.
Yes.
And what happens in terms of the risk and construction, many of the communities do not do a holdback, and they can do holdback up to a year to ensure those homes are warranted. And very few communities do that, which because off reserve, you can get a home warranty program, right? So it's a brand new home, the contractor is part of it, and the homeowner has some type of warranty. But in First Nations, that's not the case. So the community has to create their own warranty, and their own warranty would say, okay, if you're going to build this, if you're going to build this house, we're going to hold back 10% for, say, 6 months, 8 months, and we're pay you interest of 2% as our warranty. And the contractor starting the house would know that he's going to have a holdback. If not, then don't take the house, right? Maybe find somebody who, so a lot of the communities have to try to create and minimize their own or do a risk mitigation to make sure that that home is being built properly and not pay out.
We have a post here from Sheila. Thank you, Sheila. I have a contractor who did not build the blueprints to spec and did not request for a work change order and now wants final payment. But I refuse to pay due to the fact that he did not follow the contract and the building envelope could be at risk. And I am asking him to fix it. Certainly this is it can happen. It does happen. Obviously, Sheila's experience indicating that obviously it did happen. It's not, I won't say it's not common, but it's certainly not uncommon for something like this to possibly happen. Your thoughts, John?
Good question. Well, generally, again, I don't know the nature of the contract, but if he hasn't followed the contract or the terms, I would agree, not to do a payment until it's meeting the code. You almost have to get I wouldn't say a third party dispute in there or somebody to just look at it to give it an assessment, because you don't want a situation of he said, she said. So I almost need to get like an inspector in there to look at to find out how bad the construction is off from the original plan. Would you say so, Claude?
Yeah, I would say if I was looking at it, I would kind of take that approach that you base or was involved in that type of situation. Certainly, you want to compare what it should have been and compare it to what actually happened. So certainly getting back to the detail of the spec or the actual requirements of the original build. Does it happen? As I indicated, yes, it does. I mean, I've been called in where the builder moved a fireplace or made we'll call the kitchen smaller than it should have been. So it gets into the question of, certainly what can you do to try and mitigate that type of problem? And in some cases, there's not much you can do. And certainly, I think Sheila asking him to fix it is not out of line, because basically it should have been built right to the understandable contract document, which is obviously at least a set of blueprints or specs or some type of general agreement between the parties that this is what I expect and this is what I didn't get. So there certainly is a difference.
But in terms of the mitigating on the risk, we would go back even further, right from the very beginning, proper procurement, clear understanding of technical specifications, clear drawings that have been stamped and identified. So that would minimize the risk or the problem that you run it up against now. So the better the upfront information, the clearer it would be for the end results.
Yes, I would agree upon that. And I think so it really brings into question the whole issue of risk is based on what can one tolerate, but certainly on the whole issue of what's the point of a contract if it's not going to be followed to the letter, more or less. And certainly she indicated, there was no request for even a change order or for any type of modification. It was just sort of sounds like at the builder or contractor's whim, the change was made, oh, well, that's sort of good enough. Well, that's good enough should be at least, I hope, agreed upon before the actual build or the change takes place.
Yeah.
But again, it's getting back to the whole issue of risk and risk management.
So one of the questions that we have for this Thursday is we'll have the presentation by the Canadian Construction Document Center. And why it's important for their presentation is, again, their whole focus is risk. So the risk is these are the standard contracts that everybody should be using on or off reserve. These are the contracts that are the standard practices for construction. This is the standard for change orders. So they provide a number of documents to help stick handle a lot of the problems that, people on or off reserve will be dealing with. I'm dealing with a fellow that's doing construction, a project, and he had a contract. And when I asked him if it was a CCDC, he looked at it and it wasn't. It was some outdated older contract that the contractor gave him. And in there, the contract you sign, he pays for all the change orders at a minimum of X amount per dollars per whatever. But if you look at the new change order contracts, the contractor cannot charge you for architectural time on their redesigns. Cannot charge for that anymore. So that's a case right there in point where they had these documents out there to help everybody, but not being used. So it's just not an on or off reserve. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, and I think as a follow-up, John, also when we talk about and we get into the webinar on CCDC, my experience has been it's a really good legal template for contracts for construction, all types of construction. But the other thing that we can take away from this is certainly from the CCDC is you could basically take and we'll call it modify or at least mirror what they're suggesting should be in a contract. It doesn't have to be exactly, but certainly I think the other part of it is you need something more than just, we'll call it a gentleman or a person's agreement and a handshake, because sometimes, unless it's in writing, it could be open to question.
Yes, and that's going to be the focus on Thursday, the importance of those documents. So, got good comments. Okay.
So do we have any other
other
questions? Yeah, exactly. Do we have any more questions out there or comments? Feel free.
Yeah. If not, at the end, there's a document we can pass out to everybody along with the presentation. And we sort of pick up the risk and constructions on the use of contracts. So when we talk about risk mitigation, the whole purpose of the CCDC project is to look at how to use their contracts and their documents. So to minimize the risks, either the legal risk or the financial risk. So, okay.
Yeah, John, I was also going to talk a little, just a tiny bit about it in the upcoming webinar next Monday on estimations and costing. Certainly, there is a fair amount of overlap when you think of risk and construction in general, that it really touches a number of different areas.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So if that's it, I'm good to go. Otherwise, and I can't even figure out how to sign off from my end. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to finish the recording. I take it that we are finished for this particular webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.